Duty, honor, country dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
The destiny of man is not measured by material computations. When great forces are on the move in the world, we learn we're spirits, not animals.
Now, we are the masters of our fate.
Howdy, gents. Welcome back to another episode of the Wolf and Iron podcast. I'm your host, Mike Yarbrough, founder and curator of wolfandiron.com, and I'm glad you're here. And if you're just checking Wolf and Iron out for the first time, I just want to issue a special welcome to you and let you know a little bit about what Wolf and Iron is all about. I started this mission to help men heed the high call on their lives. I believe that most men feel that they're made for something more, that they ought to be better in so many different ways, certainly better than the status quo, better than what society is asking us to be, which, let's face it, the expectations are pretty low these days. We feel called to be leaders. We feel called to be better fathers, to set the example, to raise the bar. And yet we don't see great examples of that in today's society. We need some inspiration. We need some direction. And that's what Wolf and Iron is all about. Now, this episode is a little different. Occasionally, I'll do a man-to-man episode, which is just a solo episode, me talking to you guys about something that's been on my mind for some time, and I think men need to hear. I think this episode is going to be especially good. And look, I'll tell you another thing about myself. I'm unapologetically Christian. And while I don't start off each episode with a chapter and verse from the Bible, I'm going to hit on some things today because I think we need to hear them. And I'm going to be talking about the issue of shame and its role in our society. And the inspiration for this podcast episode actually comes from a question that was thrown out by one of the members of our Wolf and Iron communities, our free Facebook group. And if you're not a member already, you can head over there by going to wolfandiron.com/the group. That'll take you over to the Facebook page. There'll be some questions to answer there. We don't let just anybody in. We want to make sure you're a good fit. And that helps us keep the caliber of men over there high. But the question that was asked was this: does the lack of shame in today's society contribute to many of the problems that we see? In other words, us being in a shameless society, is that one of the reasons that we see the kind of insane things that we see today? People acting the way they're acting. The devaluing of life, the devaluing of time, the listlessness. And it was a great question. We got some great responses on that. And overwhelmingly, people said, yeah, that is a big issue. People just don't feel shame anymore. But like usual, I took a bit of a different approach to it. And my approach is this: I don't think we actually live in a shameless society. And in fact, I don't think you can have human beings that have no shame. I think actually something different is going on. I think that the shamelessness that we're exhibiting is actually just a facade. It's a mask. Now, before I go too far down the road on this, I want to talk a little bit about what guilt is and what shame is and just kind of clarify these things because, and even in this episode, I may use them interchangeably. But I think there is a difference, and I think we need to recognize what that difference is. Now, guilt, the way I see it, is when you recognize that you've done a wrong thing, and usually there's also recognition of some kind of responsibility to repay those wrongs. So you got caught stealing something, you're guilty, now you've got to pay it back, you got to go work it off, what have you. So that's guilt. Shame, on the other hand, is like a level deeper, and it's an introspective type of thing. It is the recognition that you are the type of person that did the wrong thing. That's shame. So guilt is recognition that a wrong has been done, committed by you, and guilt would typically make you want to kind of restore that relationship, undo the wrong if possible. Shame is the recognition that you're the kind of person that could do the wrong thing to begin with. Another way of looking at it is that shame is kind of like throwing dirt on our internal mirror, the way we see ourselves. And so every time we do something wrong, we feel guilty. We recognize that we are the person who did the wrong thing. It's just marring that image of ourselves. And so I don't think there's a way you can get away from shame. I think there's a lot of ways that you can ignore it. I think there are a lot of ways that we do ignore shame and we mask it. I'll actually start with a story here. Several years back, just talking about shamelessness here. Several years back, I was working at home and downstairs office. I must have been home from work early or something. I don't know what the deal was. But our house is in a cul-de-sac, and outside of the office windows, we can see the street that goes across the cul-de-sac. And it's a pretty busy street. Well, I'm sitting there working in the office, and I hear these tires screeching. Just, somebody's coming around a corner at ridiculous speeds, and by the time I look out my window, I see this truck basically plow over. I mean, he's going past our cul-de-sac. He plows over and uproots this maple tree. Doesn't stop, just keeps going, then rounds the corner down to the next street and keeps going, right? And I can hear him screeching tires the whole way, and I'm just thinking, what is going on? I'm thinking this person's outrunning the cops. I'm expecting cop cars to start flying by. And instinctively, I'm out the door because I'm thinking this guy didn't make it very far. He's probably crashed into a neighbor's house or something like that. I want to see what's happened. I go out. I'm running down my cul-de-sac because I want to catch up with this. I'll save the names for later. Catch up with this person and see what's going on. And then I hear somebody say this. This lady says, "Oh my God, they hit a child." And I'm thinking, this is terrible. Like this is awful. I'm running towards. I can see the kid laying on the ground where they right before they uprooted that tree. Apparently, they hit a boy, threw him up in the air. He hit a fence and came back down, landed on the ground. I walk up there and I see it's somebody that I know. It's a kid named Patrick. He's out walking the neighbor's dog. Great kid. And I know him and his parents. His parents are actually pastors of the church that we were going to. And, he's scuffed up and he's just laying there, mumbling a little bit. And so I call his parents, and here's the thoughts that's going through my head. I'm thinking, is this going to be the last? Am I going to be the person that they hear from first that their kid just got hit and is dead? Right. Are they going to have enough time to get out here and see their kid? And all this stuff's going on. Neighbors are gathering around. Other family members start showing up from the phone call, and the parents eventually show up. The paramedics, it seems like it take forever, but they eventually show up, load him up, take him away. Well, the good news is, Patch, as we called him, turned out mostly okay. No serious, I guess, long-term injuries. In fact, I think he was kind of up and moving around that day, tough as nails type of thing. Really fortunate more than anything else. The guys that hit him, however, their car did break down. They almost made it out of the neighborhood. There was this trail of oil and just nastiness from where they hit that tree. They were high as all get out. They're big time drunk. And the cops caught up with them pretty quickly, arrested them, took them off. I don't know exactly what all happened to him after that, but I do know this. And this is the point here. At some point between them hitting Patch and getting arrested and taken off to prison, they got on Facebook and they bragged about it. They bragged about it. They said, we hit this kid, this punk kid, ran him over. It's just such thuggery. I couldn't even understand how somebody's mind could get to that point where they're thinking, I've done this thing that's so terrible. I may have just killed somebody's child. And I want to act like it's a good thing. So when we talk about shamelessness, that's what I'm thinking about. That's the first thing that comes to mind. Just absolute no regard for the wrong that has been done. And it would be easy to look at somebody like that and just say, throw the book at them, just walk them off a cliff. They're no good to society. They're no good to themselves. There's no recovery here for this kind of person. But I don't think that's exactly what's happening. And I've heard too many stories where guys have done that kind of stuff and then later felt remorse and felt their shame. And then, they're mentors now. They're the guys that you couldn't believe that they had, that they would have done something like that. So I don't believe we live in a shameless society. I believe shamelessness is a mask. And I believe it's a mask because we have a society that by and large, because we don't have a relationship with Christ and with God, we don't know what to do with our shame. And we don't know what to do with our guilt. Now, people don't walk around thinking, I'm going to hide my shame, I'm going to hide my guilt. Most people don't do that anyhow. Right? If you have some childhood trauma, usually it may be sexual in nature or something like that, some terrible thing happens to you that you couldn't have controlled. Sometimes shame comes along with that. It's not shame you should have, but it comes along all the same. And people don't walk around going, well, I'm just going to hide my shame and put on a happy face. It's a subconscious thing that takes place here. And years later, as an adult, they got to go, oh my gosh, I'm ashamed of something that I shouldn't be ashamed of necessarily. I've got to deal with this. But I think society, by and large, is doing this because we don't have a place to put our shame. Now, imagine this. I know a lot of you guys are listening to this. You're already Christians. And so this might be something of a new concept for you because maybe you've grown up in the church and you've been a Christian, been around Christians all your life. And so this is something that's going to kind of shock you a little bit. But imagine that you've grown up not knowing about Christ, and in fact, growing up believing that there is no God and that it's all just fairy tales. And you have a very naturalistic worldview, and yet you do wrong things. You do things that you wish you hadn't done. Maybe you can look over some of the white lies. Maybe you can look over some of the typical things that people do. But there are things that you've done that you just don't feel right about. And maybe you've not even identified it as guilt and as shame, but it's in there. And it makes you second guess yourself. It makes you wonder what kind of person you are. It makes you cynical about other people and distrusting of others. And you've got a whole life of this, and you got nowhere to put it. There's some things that you've done that you just can't undo. They're in the past. Maybe it's hurting other people. Maybe it's just hurting your own conscience. And you got nowhere to go with this. And so you just chalk it up. Well, it's just part of being human. It's just what we do. Everybody's in the same boat, so I guess I'm not that bad after all in comparison to everyone else. So you've got a truckload of shame. Maybe a better way of saying this. You've got this storehouse full of shame, and it's just packed full. And you don't want to crack open the door to that place because what's going to come tumbling out you can't deal with. What's the point? You got nowhere to put it. And so you act like it doesn't matter. You act as if it's no big deal. In fact, you go further into the things that make you ashamed of yourself, and you try to really accept and own your shame. Is this making sense? I've done some bad things, but hey, that's part of being human. I'm a human, therefore it's acceptable. And in fact, I'm not going to allow it to own me. I'm going to own it by continue doing the same thing that makes me feel guilty. I just got to get over this thing. I got to get through this. And so you ignore it. You can continue down the same path, and it builds up and it builds up and it builds up. And so that's where I think a lot of society is today. It's unconscious. People don't realize it. But they're in this state where they've got a storehouse of shame and they don't know what to do with it. And so they put on this mask of shamelessness as if being a terrible person is just part of being human. They're going to own their humanity, own their sin. And you see, this is kind of the state of the world, basically. In many places it still is, but certainly before Christ. Even the Jews would feel ashamed and feel guilty, and they would have to make sacrifices to atone for that for a period of time. There's always just this weight of guilt on them. And then Christ comes along, and he does the amazing thing. He says, I'm going to live a perfect life. I'm going to be crucified on your behalf. And that's going to take the penalty of all the wrong things that you've done before the eyes of God. The very Creator himself is going to look upon you, and he's not going to see your shame. He's going to see my life and my sacrifice. and he's going to love you. And he's going to rejoice over you. And he's going to be glad of you. And he takes away our sin and shame. And so there's more to this episode, guys. Don't tune out yet. But I want to, just as a stopping point here for a second. If you're not a Christian and you're listening to this, and there's something going on there internally, I'm going to tell you something, guys. This doesn't have to be a multi-year process where you're just kind of getting rid of your guilt and your shame. This can happen in a moment. And I've seen it. I've experienced it myself, but I've also seen it in many, many people. You don't have to carry around your shame. Christ came to take that from you, to take it. And look, when you're good with the creator of all that is, you're good. Now, I can hear the naysayers already. Some guys are saying, no, Mike, you got it all wrong. You see, it's not Christianity or religion that solves the problem of shame. It's actually religion's issue that we have shame and guilt to begin with. I mean, most of us who aren't religious are walking around feeling pretty good about ourselves. We feel pretty happy. Life is good. That whole thing about comparing yourself to other humans and kind of feeling like, yeah, I'm just kind of part of the natural order of things. Actually, that's pretty good for not feeling guilty about stuff. And then people bring in religion and very specific morality, and all of a sudden, you start to feel guilty again. And you begin to think about, oh, well, maybe I don't measure up to perfection. I mean, really, that's what you got? Perfection is going to be the standard for humanity? Of course people are going to feel guilty about that. So religion is actually at fault for the guilt and the shame that people are dealing with. And if we would just shut up about all this religious nonsense, we'll just think about all the good things we could do if we weren't so focused on how awful we felt and all the things we're not supposed to do. And I get that. I don't think it's a good argument, but I get it. For the person who doesn't want to be a part of any kind of organized religion for whatever reason, that could satisfy as an argument. I can see that. But I don't think it's the case. I don't buy it for a second. And I'll tell you why. We're essentially making the argument by saying that being in the state of ignorance and bliss is more important than being in a state of truth. That's really what we're arguing for by taking that point. If only I'm not aware. Well, as long as the standard is simply whatever arbitrary standard I come up with and measure myself against according to the people that I'm surrounded by, as long as I'm better than, at least as good as, if not better than my friends or better than those terrible people I see on TV, then that's good. As long as I feel good about myself, then I'm in a state I ought to be. And that's really where humanity should be. And of course, that's nonsense. Here's what many religions do. I'm not going to say Christianity is the only one that does this. And in fact, philosophy does this. But it makes us aware of a standard, and it causes us to reflect on ourselves. Now, if that was it, and a lot of religions leave it right there, that would really suck, to be honest. If the best thing that philosophy or a religion could do was just make me aware of how terrible I am, and that I've got to now work this off somehow, and once again, some arbitrary fashion, hoping that in the next go around, maybe the next life, or wherever the afterlife happens to lead, that I'm going to end up, in a good situation. Screw that. I'm not for that at all. And this is one of the ways that Christianity differentiates itself from the other religions. It doesn't say you got to work this stuff off. It says Christ did. Here's what you got to do. Put your belief in Christ. Do you believe that you're a sinner? Most people would say yes, if they're honest. Do you believe that God, being perfect, would be just in punishing sin? Sure. Do you believe that Christ is the propitiation? He's the substitute. He's the atonement for your sins. He's the guy that took the sentence that was due to you. Yes. Okay. Follow him. Know him. Model yourself after him. Profess him. That's it. All the other stuff about becoming a better person, the more you get to know Christ, that's going to happen. You don't have to pray a certain number of times a day. There's not a list of things you can and can't eat or drink. I'm not saying this to make it sound simplistic. I'm just saying it's not about you. It's about somebody else. That's the good news, guys. Now, let me address this one piece, though, that I thought was good in my argument, my fake argument. That perfection really isn't the standard that we should hold ourselves to. And that it's actually kind of an absurd standard. I mean, if we think about it. But I don't really think that's the case. And in fact, I think we expect perfection far often than we say we do. Now, of course, we don't expect it of ourselves because we're very forgiving of ourselves. You may have noticed this. But let's say you got a bank that you bank with. You've thrown in your money there for years and years. You've been working hard, saving up some cash, and you go and you check your balance, and you see it's all zeroed out, and you're freaking out. You got bills that have got to be paid. You know, this is it's like your kid's future, whatever the case may be. Or if you're like me, it's just next week's groceries. You know, let's be honest. So you call the bank up and you say, guys, what is the deal? My bank account is at zero. I know I'm supposed to have money in there. What's going on? And they say, hey, look, Mike, yeah, looks like we messed up in some kind of way. Totally sorry about that. But look, honestly, we've got a lot of bank accounts that we deal with. And the truth is, some of them are just going to get kind of messed up. You know, I mean, we can't expect everybody to be perfect here. So, you know, let's just call this one, hey, part of being human, we screwed up, and, you know, just roll with it. You know, that's not going to fly, right? And so there are a lot of areas in life like this. You go to the doctor, you get a test, you want that test to be perfect, right? You want it to be accurate results of whether or not you have an issue or you don't have an issue. There are a lot of areas like this in life where we expect perfection, and not having perfection is not acceptable at all. And these usually pop up in areas where it's areas of very high importance, like your money, your health. And there are areas where people have authority over the things that are important to you. How many times have we said this, right? Probably to ourselves, maybe to other people. If I were God and I were all knowing and all seeing and all powerful, I certainly wouldn't have let that happen, right? Whatever's on the news, whatever it happens to be. There's no way I would have allowed that to take place. I wouldn't have made, I don't know, mosquitoes, whatever. And where does it end? I mean, we expect, you see, guys, we expect God to be perfect. But yet we don't want him to see us through his perfect lens. We don't want any child to die. We don't want any hurricane to kill people. We don't want any tsunamis. We don't want anybody to stub their toe. At the end of the day, we think if we were absolutely in control and we knew everything that was going to happen and we had the ability to make changes, that we would do things differently. And in fact, we would do it perfectly. And so when we talk about there is a being, God of the Bible, who is in this state of control over everything. He knows all, he can do all, he's omniscient, he's omnipotent. We expect him to be perfect, and anything less than that is unacceptable. But when it comes to us, we say, we don't want him to be perfectly just, because if he was perfectly just, what would happen? We'd all have it coming to us, fellas. So once again, the good news of Christ. So perfection is not an absurd standard. It may be an unattainable standard, but it is not an absurd standard. And let's just be honest here. Most of us, if we stop comparing ourselves to our friends and our neighbors and the worst of those around us, we are fully aware that there are a lot of areas where we fall short. And there are areas where we do some despicable things. The question I have is, are you man enough to admit that? And then the next question I have is, what do you do with that shame? Fellas, I love your feedback on this. I think this is a good episode to generate some discussion. Especially, I'm interested in having feedback from those who are listening. You've made it all the way through the podcast now that are not Christians. I know I've got a lot of Odin followers here, some pagans that listen to the Wolf and Iron podcast. I appreciate you guys. I respect you guys as men. I do. I don't always understand why you believe the way you believe, but I know we have some things in common. And so I do respect your feedback and your thoughts, and it helps me to understand men better, to get all different perspectives. So please head over to the Facebook group. It's a great place to start discussions on this thing. wolfandiron.com/the group. And if you like this podcast episode, be sure to subscribe to the Wolf and Iron podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And, I'd love for you guys to leave a review. Sometimes that process can be a little bit tricky. I'm not going to try to walk you through it here. You can figure it out. You're smart. But subscribe, share, review. That's going to help the podcast get in front of the guys that need to hear it the most. And until next time, keep your powder dry, and may a fair wind be always in your sails.